me? Okay. Hi everybody, good evening. My name is Kylie Smith, and from a very young age, I have been absolutely fascinated by the brain. That is me, that's not a stock photo. I've been intrigued by how it works, how it commands our bodies, and even how it's convinced me that it's just the coolest thing that we could possibly study. But even so, at this young age, I couldn't have imagined that I would be standing here talking to you about neuroscience technology and how I have the opportunity to work with it. And to me, the reason for that is that often neuroscience can feel out of reach, right? So young Kylie, which I just showed you, had this image of a brain researcher and people that use neuroscience technology as this person in a white coat at a fancy institution who comes from some long line of scientists, right? And maybe that's something that you can relate to. But even if that's not what you pictured when you thought of a brain researcher, we all likely would have to follow the same path to get to studying neuroscience and using these tools to study how the brain works. The key to accessing this kind of technology is generally to find yourself at in an academic institution where you might spend 2 or 4 or 10 years learning to work with this kind of technology and using it to learn about the brain. Now this requires significant investment in terms of money and time. But not everybody has access to the resources that allows them to do that, right? And if people do have these kinds of barriers, does this mean that they should not be able to access this technology? Does that mean that they shouldn't be able to use this technology to learn about the brain and study it to make advancements in the field? I'm here to tell you today that that shouldn't be the case, and it doesn't have to be. So during my undergraduate studies, I jumped at the opportunity to work with this very cool company called Backyard Brains, whose focus is do-it-yourself neuroscience, and their motto is neuroscience for everybody. It might sound familiar. The way that they pursue this motto is by creating low-cost equipment that can be used to study the nervous system. So my project while I was working with them, and currently, was to develop an in-class exercise that could be used to study the way that the brain talks, or in other words, brain waves and brain potentials. And you do this using low-cost technology such as this custom-printed circuit board modified with very simple electronics components. They're meant to be low-cost and also easy to use. So what I've designed is a classroom exercise where students can come in, hook their friend up to this equipment, and quickly read their mind. Maybe not that. But what they can do is see what the brain is doing in response to certain events, right? And I really like this example because this young woman shown here had really unknowingly walked into this room and they said, want to talk to these people? And we said, can we hook you up and read your brain? And thankfully she was very enthusiastic. So what we can do is we can create these very short experiments and bring them into the classroom so that we can show students how this kind of neuroscience data is collected, give them the hands-on experiences to do this, and then allow them to collect the data themselves. And not only do they get experience collecting this data, but we get a real-time output of what this kind of data looks like, and they get experience handling it and interpreting it as well. So my focus is on the alpha wave, which you can see here is these bands of 10 Hertz activity, and then additionally event-related potentials, and specifically the P300. Imagine that you come into class one day and someone says, hey, we're going to strap up your friend, and in 7 minutes, roughly, you'll be able to see what's going on inside their brain. Which is pretty cool, right? Not only is this intended for the classroom, but there are people at home that have interest in neuroscience and how the brain works as well that might not have this kind of access to technology. So we think about it in terms of this classroom exercise, but we also post all of this information online. Outside of the equipment, everything is accessible, so people can follow along at home as well if they're interested in science. And by approaching neuroscience education in this way, we can introduce young students, young scientists, and the public to the basics of brain signaling without requiring them to go to university for many years and sink lots of time and money. Additionally, this provides them with hands-on experiences which time and time again have been shown to improve learning, understanding, and retention for time to come. And lastly, I think it humanizes the scientists and makes science more accessible in general. It shows them how scientific experiment is conducted and starts to plant these ideas of how they can modify it to ask questions of their own. So whether you are doing it in the classroom, at home, or at a family barbecue on your grandmother, we need to be meeting people where they are to engage them in neuroscience. And by doing this, we might inspire people to take the path that leads them to study the brain, answer these unanswered questions that we have about how the brain works, and maybe start to really chip away at these cures to these neurological disorders that we've heard about earlier today, are plaguing our friends and our peers and the other people that we share the world with. Thank you.